Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I am looking for creepy things in the northeast region of the United States to research and visit and take footage of. There are supposedly cryptids in a forest near me called Pukwudgies. They are basically those things from Skyrim, but turn into hedgehogs or other small woodland creatures when spotted. If that's true, then it would be pretty hard to catch on film if they exist. The area is known for many paranormal things, from cult sacrifices to UFO sightings to an ominous rock that possesses people to take their lives. I plan on camping in the woods when the weather gets better and seeing if anything spooky happens. Probably nothing will happen due to my shit luck. But hey, anything's possible, right?
In the southeastern corner of Massachusetts lies Bristol County, an area known locally as the most haunted place in New England. The energy that sleeps there has been rumored to cause haunted schools, ghostly armies, and unexplained suicides and murders. Forested areas of the county have long been known to contain a litany of unexplained animals, from Bigfoot and Thunderbirds to large snakes and odd bear-like monsters. For the past 40 years, cults have flocked there, and their activities, often criminal, have filled the blotters of local law enforcement. Of all the unknown horrors that live in Bristol County, the most feared is not an animal or a ghost, or the members of satanic cults that walk the forests, but a demon only 2 feet high. And if the history of the area represents the history of our American society, these Pukwudgies are the gatekeepers of our darker side. The Pukwudgies have haunted the forests of Massachusetts since before the first European settlers ever thought about setting out for a new land. For centuries, they tormented the local Native Americans and crept their way into their creation myths and oral history. They could easily be passed off as legend, and in fact, their physical description is much like mythological creatures from other cultures in other times. The difference is these demons jumped from the page and evolved as the people around them changed, changing from reluctant helpers to evil tormentors. The difference is these demons are still seen by people today. Most cultures' mythology has some reference to small monsters that have a strained relationship with humans. In many ways it makes sense. While large monsters have their place in our fears, diminutive creatures find their way into the shadows of our rooms and under our beds. Their names and nature change, but there are always common threads that link them together. Some are called monsters and roam the land looking for human food and kidnapping anyone they can find. Others are called demons, foul spirits that feed of the negative and expose the sins of man. When referring to one, its classification gets blurred, and these two words become interchangeable, perhaps showing us how closely associated these monsters are with evil. Veterans returning home after World War II talked of gremlins tearing apart their planes, or getting into Jeep engines and causing havoc. The Hindus speak of the Rakshasas, or the Night Wander, who eat human skin and jump into the dead to possess them. Africans tell stories about the Aloko who lure people with beautiful music only to devour them after they have been bewitched with an ever-expanding jaw. Although passed off as works of fiction and imagination, trolls and dwarfs have existed in people's fears for centuries. They have become lovable and noble now, but the original stories recorded of these monsters are anything but fairy tales with happy endings. Trolls were notorious for ambushing travelers and destroying whole families on a whim. While some are described as giants with humps and one eye, many older cultures, especially in Scandinavia, described the being as the size of a plump child. Dwarfs have always been small and their manners much better, but the end result seems to be the same. Like the troll, they are known as metal and stone workers, but unlike their flesh-eating counterparts, dwarves seem to avoid human contact. While they would prefer to be left alone, if impeded upon their work, they become like caged dogs. One variation of the dwarf is the Tommyknocker, who lives in mine shafts and is sometimes said to be the ghost of miners who have perished in the line of duty and are doomed to work for eternity. They are known to cause cave-ins and fires in the shafts. Perhaps the most famous of the small nightmares are seen by the Irish. Fairies patrol the roads in Ireland, causing problems for any traveler who strays from the path. They live in hills or mounds and dance around fires. If a human comes across their mound or see their dancing, they are caught and held captive. Even the beloved leprechaun was once a malicious spirit before he was Americanized and transformed into the gold keeper he is today. Exposure to nature seems to feed these tales, and the more a society depends on the earth for its needs, and the closer the relationship a people have with the natural world around them, the more these stories pop up. In this country, the people the first settlers found had a close, if not friendly, view of small dangers around them. The Cherokee have a mirror image demon known as the Yunwi Junsti, or little people, that look and talk like Cherokee but are only a few feet high and have long hair that touches the ground. Although most people cannot see them, they are known to throw objects, trip up hunters, and abduct people who wander off. In Canada, they are known as Menegishi and look much like the classic alien gray. The Wampanoag Nation, the dominant Native American tribe in Massachusetts and southern New England, had a monster who still dominates the landscape they once roamed. The Pukwudgie made its first appearance in the oral folklore of the people of Cape Cod, but recent sightings have forced people to rethink this mythological creature. Standing between 2 and 3 feet tall, the Pukwudgie looks much like our modern idea of a troll. His features mirror those of the Native American in the area, but the nose, fingers, and ears are enlarged, and the skin is described as being gray and/or washed out, smooth, and at times has been known to glow. What makes these monsters dangerous is the multitude of magical abilities they use to torment and manipulate people. They can appear and disappear at will, and are said to be able to transform into other animals. They have possession of magical poison arrows that can kill and can create fire at will. They seem to often be related to a tall, dark figure, often referred to in modern times as shadow people. In turn, the Pukwudgies control Tepehuancas, which are believed to be the souls of Native Americans they have killed. They use these lights to entice new victims in the woods, so they may kidnap or kill them. In European folklore, these balls of energy are known as will-o'-the-wisps and are said to accompany many paranormal occurrences. Modern paranormal investigators call them orbs, and catching one on film is the gold standard of field research. Legends of the Pukwudgie began in connection to Maushop, a creation giant believed by the Wampanoag to have created most of Cape Cod. He was beloved by the people, and the Pukwudgies were jealous of the affection the natives had for him. They tried to help the Wampanoag, but their efforts always backfired until they eventually decided to torment them instead. They became mischievous and aggravated the natives until they asked Quant, Maushop's wife, for help. Maushop collected as many as he could. He shook them until they were confused and tossed them around New England. Some died, but others landed, regained their minds, and made their way back to Massachusetts. The Pukwudgies remained, however, but something odd happens. The timing of the tales of the monster are a map through the history of the Native Americans' relationship with the European settlers. The death of the 5 sons lines up with the very first settlers, and the flight of Maushop is told alongside the changing of attitudes about the new neighbors. The Pukwudgies, always seen in a negative light, become the foot soldiers of the devil, which may explain their modern connection to shadow people. As more Native Americans began to convert to Christianity, their myths evolved until the Pukwudgies were responsible for the evil in the village and the hand of Satan on the tribe. People who spend time in the forest of New England will tell you Pukwudgies are not symbols, but a real horror that still stalks people. They continue to see them, and as the world develops around them, the monsters remain unchanged and as dark as ever. Joan was walking her dog through the state forest in Freetown, Massachusetts on a cold Saturday morning in April when she saw the monster. As she and her dog Sid walked down the path, Sid became anxious and strayed a few feet into the woods. Joan followed him in and stopped short. Her dog was lying completely flat in the leaves, and on a rock 10 feet away was a Pukwudgie. She described him as looking like what she would describe as a troll, 2 feet high with pale gray skin and hair on his arms and the top of his head. The monster seemed to have no clothes, but it was difficult to tell because his stomach hung over his waist, almost touching his knees. His eyes were a deep green, and he had large lips and a long, almost canine nose. The Pukwudgie stood watching her, staring straight at her with no expression, almost like it was stunned to see her. Joan froze and remembers thinking the air in her lungs had been pushed out. Sid finally came to and ran back towards the trial, dragging Joan, who was still holding the leash tightly. Although the whole exchange took less than 30 seconds, it remains with Joan 10 years later. She has not gone back to the forest but feels that might not be enough. 3 times since the event she has woken up to find the demon looking in on her. It has never attacked her or spoken to her. She has merely seen it looking through her bedroom window, staying just long enough for her to notice him. All 3 times she claims she was fully awake and could move if she had to. Another man in Framingham, Massachusetts had an experience that forced him to remain away from the woods. Tim was in a forest when he saw a bright orb in front of him. Having investigated the paranormal, he was excited and tried to snap a photo with his digital camera. The ball of light disappeared and reappeared a few feet further into the woods. Tim followed, losing the spirit several times before he realized he had traveled more than 30 feet off the path into a thickly wooded area. He became scared and slowly made his way back to the path, only to find a 2-foot man standing there, walking towards him. He turned and ran, and looking back saw the figure move back into the woods. Tim reported that what he saw had walked upright and had used its arms to push something aside when he fled to the forest. He had moved with a slight limp, but like a human. The second time Tom saw the Pukwudgies was a few years later in a parking lot near the same forest. He was listening to the radio at almost a whisper and checking his rearview mirror for the friend he was waiting for when he saw the same small figure of a man. Every detail was identical, and the Pukwudgie just stood there watching him. The car turned on by itself and his radio began to get louder. Tim pulled out of the parking lot and took the long way home to try and stop his hands from shaking. Although the monster seemed content to only frighten Joan and Tim, there are still physical attacks happening. Several people have been assaulted, and one person came down with a mysterious illness after seeing them in a cemetery in New Hampshire. Another woman suffered scratches on her arm after following an orb in a forest in Taunton, Massachusetts. The most disturbing reoccurring attacks might be taking place at the Pukwudgies' favorite hunting ground. In the Freetown State Forest, there is a 100-foot cliff overlooking a quarry known as the Ledge. There have been many hauntings at this site, but the most frequent experience is an overwhelming feeling to jump to the rocks and water below. In the folklore of the Wampanoag, the Pukwudgies were known to lure people to cliffs and push them off to their death. There have been several unexplained suicides at the Ledge, often by people who had no signs of depression or mental disease before entering the forest.
I have seen a goblin, and what others called a Pukwudgie. The goblin was pretty uncanny. It had clothes that I would guess were made from pressed mushroom or some kind of leather. It looked right at me for a second and fled into the bush it was laying on. I remember the bush bounced and my mom and dad both thought I saw an animal, and I asked my dad a bunch if he saw it too, and he said he saw something jump but couldn't see what it was. He had a wrinkly face and looked kinda like a sad old man. Skin was brown and he might have had a hat like a beanie. Something about the leather of his jacket really stuck with me though, like even as a kid I couldn't tell what it was made of. But I remember that the sewings were uneven, like there were 3 stitches in some places and 2 in others. It kinda bothered me as a kid for some reason.
I was just listening to a podcast about the Bridgewater Triangle in Massachusetts. They made a documentary about it a couple of years ago. When they were making it, I emailed them some random stories, but they didn't write back. I thought I would put them in here. I grew up near the Bridgewater Triangle, but not technically in it. I went to Bridgewater State later, which is right in there. Anyway, back about 1990 or 91, I remember being on the bus waiting to leave from the high school, and I was just looking out the window in the direction of the junior high school. I saw a gray cylinder shape just hanging in the air. I just thought it was weird at the time. Later on as an adult, I read that UFOs are often seen near schools. I was like, Also, back in the early 90s when I first got my license, I went one day to buy gas at this gas station in town. I often went by it in my parents' car. I never saw anyone buying gas there, even though I could see someone in the building. By car, it was near my house. So I went one day and tried to buy gas. The guy came out and told me they were closed and just went back and sat down to watch TV with his friends. I was like, WTF? Sell me some gas? So many years later, I read a book about Barry Seal, and there was a part where the author talked about some spooks being between assignments, and they just put them in a gas station and paid them to hang around and stay out of trouble. One of the guys being interviewed specifically said they would sit around watching TV or playing cards, and if anyone came by, they would just tell them the place was closed. So I was like, Another time in about 2002 or 03, I was driving home from work at dusk in the summer. It was almost dark. I had the windows down. I was crossing this intersection and this kid, maybe 9 or 10, jumped out yelling, "Hey, hey, hey, stop!" I was like, WTF? Stupid kid playing tricks on people. He's gonna get run over. Much, much later, I read about some story of a kid escaping something and flagging someone down, and I was like, oh shit. No idea if it was a kid playing tricks or what. Also, back in the mid-90s, there was a big new development of like 5 or 6 streets with all new McMansions. I used to cut through it to my friend's house. There was this house, and for literally almost a year, there was a guy sitting in a car outside day and night. All the kids at the HS called him the stakeout guy. Again, no idea what that was about. Another time, in about 2002, I was sitting in traffic on the highway in Braintree, and I saw this black-colored helicopter fly overhead. I had my window open, and even though it was so low you could look right into the cockpit, you couldn't hear it at all until it was right overhead. Then this is out of range, but I was up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire with my son who was 3 back a few years ago. We were at this nature preserve or something right by the airport. There was snow everywhere. There is a boardwalk through the woods, but apparently no one shovels it in the winter. So my son ran on ahead around a little bend, and I couldn't see him for a minute. Finally, he came back. He says to me, "A man over there offered me candy, but I said I had to check with you first before I took any." I was like, "What the actual fuck did you just say?" So he said he was walking down this boardwalk, and he saw a little man standing under a tree to the side of the boardwalk. He said the guy had a basket around his neck, and he told my son to reach in and take something. So this was when my son told him no and came back. I was thinking to myself, well shit, must be a Minecraft YouTuber hanging out in the woods. So I had him show me where he saw the guy. It was just a little tree with a depression in the snow around the tree. There was no sign of any footprints or anything. I went all up and down the path and I couldn't see any evidence of anyone else around. So I figured we better just get on out of there. When we were back in the car, I asked my son to describe the guy. He said the guy was a little taller than he was, as a 3-year-old. He had long black hair, basket around his neck. He didn't say anything about his clothes. Then he was struggling to describe the guy's skin. He was like, it was like, metal, like a big coin, like a quarter. I was like, gray. Yeah, gray. So I was like, WTF? Guess we're not coming back here anytime soon. So when I got home, I was typing in his description and something came up called Pukwudgie. Another time, I was at my mother's house right around the Bridgewater Triangle area, up late at night because I worked second shift. I had the windows open because it was summer and there was no AC. So I was sitting there, and all of a sudden I heard this sound. I literally thought it was the sound of a woman being murdered in my backyard. I was running to get my phone to call the cops, but then I heard it again, exactly the same. I realized it must not be a person, because no one would scream precisely the same way twice in a row like that, and not be saying anything in between. So I figured it must be some kind of animal out there. We had a little hobby farm, so I was afraid it would do something to the animals. So like an idiot, I took a hatchet and flashlight and went into the backyard. Just like in the movies, it was all foggy, so I couldn't see anything. But when I went out and started flashing the light around, all of a sudden I heard something go crashing through the underbrush off into the woods.
I live some ways away, but I vividly remember a childhood experience with the Triangle area. Be me, 13, geocaching with family, both parents and younger brother. Go to an allegedly haunted trail. Still don't remember the exact location, but it went under some pylons and along a river. Real specific, I know. Almost immediately, weird shit starts happening. Father's phone inexplicably dies at 70%. GPS stays on, but loses signal constantly. Along the trail there is constant rustling in the tall grass-like foliage, but nothing is ever seen. No squirrels or birds or anything. Sounds like something big. Eventually the brush parts, and the sound of something big taking heavy stomping steps goes across the path about 10 feet ahead of us. The grass parts again on the other side, and the rustling fades in the distance. Remember, even at the time my thoughts were, oh, an invisible monster. For some reason we all brushed this off, but all kind of freaked out at this point. The aforementioned rustling has stopped, but now there are loud splashes from the river. Upon closer inspection, it's more like the sound of a large rock or log being thrown in. Very clearly see. Something falls from above and lands in the river, too fast to see. Look up, just in time, to see the largest bird I've ever seen in my life fly overhead. When I say large, I don't mean, wow, that's an abnormally large bird. I mean, holy shit, that's a fucking thunderbird. Pic-related kinda resembles it. It was fast as hell, so I didn't get that good a look at it. If I had to guess, I'd say the wingspan was nearly 14 feet, almost as wide as the river. A few more minor things happen on the walk out. Most notably, the GPS is ripped out of my mother's hand by an unseen force and sticks to a random rock for a moment. She says it felt exactly like someone had grabbed it and pulled it away. It didn't fall to the ground so much as fly as if thrown, but she didn't throw it. Not that much more to tell except that I took the rock the GPS stuck to home. Probably just younger me freaking myself out, but I ended up chucking it into a river near my house because of a feeling of vague dread that seemed to surround it. I am furious today because of the possibility that I had an actual cursed object and willingly threw it away. But it probably wasn't the rock that was special, just the area it was found in. I also got bored about 1 year ago and went back to the Bridgewater area, specifically the Hockomock Swamp and later the Freetown State Forest. Didn't see any Satanists in the latter, but did find a fallen tree with "Help" in red paint. Took a picture and actually filmed my whole walk through the area, but didn't see anything. Hockomock Swamp, however. It could have been just my imagination, but I could feel what I would best describe as sanity slippage the further I went. Near the end of the trail I walked on, there was a lot of random garbage dumped in the woods, and on the walk back, a couple of people on ATVs scared the shit out of me. But nothing else happened. Didn't ask if they were Satanists.
Damn, what a small world. I lived a few miles from the Hockomock Swamp for the last 8 years before my folks sold their house. Dirt biked in it with friends all the time, explored some of it, and had a crazy experience which led me to stop exploring it altogether. I had heard stories from friends over the years who explored and camped in it, from beings living in the trees, Pukwudgies playing pranks, to ghost children being seen around the swamp. Strange lights following people, GPS, electronics going haywire in the swamp. All sorts of weird things. I became fascinated with the swamp in 2014 after watching a doc about the Bridgewater Triangle. I spent some of my youth growing up in Bridgewater and wasn't aware of the history of the area. A few friends made a plan to check out the swamp one night and see what we encountered. We had 3 jeeps and used the entrance behind Raynham Dog Track to enter the power lines around the swamp. About a mile in, and our phones and one of my friend's jeep's electronics started acting up. I felt heavy, depressing vibes once we went further in, as if something wanted us out of there. We got further in and the vibe got even stronger. Something wasn't right. Nothing further happened after that, and we decided to head home, with plans to explore it more in the future. That night, I had a vivid dream of a Native American on a hill with a warning to never go back to the swamp again. I was woken up shortly after by a wooden shelf falling off my wall and all 3 of my cats sitting at the end of my bed. I took the message seriously and never went back. If you're not aware of the history of the swamp, I would look into it. King Philip's War and the slaughter of the natives is deeply rooted in the swamp's energetic body. Supposedly, after losing so many of their men, the remaining natives cursed the swamp to be uninhabitable forever.
I live in central Indiana. When I was in my early 20s, I would frequently visit Mound State Park. Myself, a buddy of mine, and my then girlfriend, now wife, would go probably twice a week or not more often to walk the trails and smoke up a bit. Over the course of that certain summer, I learned that park and its trails like the back of my hand. As we would walk, we would talk about Pukwudgies and of the Indian burial mounds and the supposed cavern system beneath the park, checking holes in the ground or in hillsides just for the heck of it. One late summer day, I remember we were walking, joking, and smoking when all of a sudden, the next thing I knew, I was standing down in a creek bed by myself. The amount of confusion and complete feeling of not having any bearing on my location was terrifying. As soon as I snapped out of my WTF haze, I looked around the bed I stood in, and there were two small, childlike footprints in the sandy mud beside me. I wore a US size 10 and was in my flip-flops that day. A short distance ahead of me was a trail bridge that spanned the creek I was standing in. That's where I met back up with my friends. They were so high they didn't even register how serious I was about what had just happened. I was not. I was always more of a one-hit, and I'm a good kind of guy. I've hardly been back since.
Some backstory. My dad lived in the woods. My mom died when I was 4. My dad raised me believing in skinwalkers and other freakish things. Guess he has always been in /X/file at heart. We grew our food and hunted for it. He didn't trust corporations to feed us safely. My mom died from extremely bad food poisoning, so it was understandable. He stocked up on guns to the point it was almost military. I remember in his locker he had 3 AK-47S, AFAL, a PS-90, and 3 shotguns I didn't bother to remember. He always wore his old military 1911 out hunting. We had a good 400 acres of land, and it was rich in metal. He had his own little mine. Our knives, silverware, and even ammunition was made by hand. I don't think we ever paid for something other than gas. He grew up a native-born Chinook lad. He joined the U.S. military when the Vietnam War broke out and served until 1978. So being 50% and 100% Chinook, we were both members of the tribe. We always had a good relationship. We would play games together, tell stories, mostly ghost stories, and even forge knives for the hell of it. But most of the time it was work. We lived as bare bones as possible. Beyond the guns, the forging, the cabin, and the chess, we lived like our ancestors. We were never Christian. I still ain't. We would practice old rituals, even some abandoned by the official tribe. No wonder the elders loved us. My manhood ceremony was extremely straining, but we will save that story for another time. We had a portion of the river running through our property. We frequently had vagrants trespassing until we had our signs up for the salmon run. That shit didn't fly. We consider the salmon martyrs as they are sent by the Great Spirit himself and believe they deserve the utmost respect, not being gutted messily and dumped on the river's sand to rot. Every salmon run, we held our own version of the Great Salmon Feast. It was just us, so we only took what we would need for the year. In Chinook culture, salmon reincarnate as people, living under the sea after being eaten. I always thought that was a little weird, but I'm getting off track. During the King Salmon run of 1985, me and my dad were out setting our nets. It was 3 in the morning as our policy was bright and early this time of year. We had been up telling ghost stories and had just finished our prayer to the Great Spirit for a bountiful harvest. I was setting the net at the north side of the river, so I was close to my father but still isolated. Keep in mind our relationship was always incredible. That's why I was confused and scared when I saw him raise his pistol in my direction. I was startled and scared, but I knew he would never hurt me. So I turned around, drawing my own gun while I span. A short man with bristles coming out of his back was leaning against a tree behind me. I immediately began moving towards my canoe, keeping my gun trained on the thing. I could have sworn it snapped its fingers and laughed when I fell in. The water was freezing, and I was incredibly lucky that I hadn't fallen into the deeper part of the river. The thing did a little jig and moved closer to me. I unloaded my pistol's magazine, probably scaring away any nearby game, but that didn't matter to us at the time. When it finally got within 4 feet of me, it giggled, and finally spoke, saying something along the lines of, "Boo, I flip my shit and run to the canoe." My dad is shouting prayers at it, and it eventually vanishes. We finished laying our nets as quickly as we could, and the next day, before checking them, we burned sage to bless the area. My dad remained adamant that it was our tribe's equivalent of a Pukwudgie, though I have a hard time remembering the term for them. Fuck gnomes.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.